Please take your seats.
We're going to continue the program now. We've already had a tremendous morning, and we still have a lot to get to, so let's get to it. But before I introduce the moderator of our next panel, I'd like to ask a special shout out if we could. Look, these programs don't just happen. There is an army of people behind the scenes on the webcast, scheduling, registration, everything. Would you please join me in thanking the Council of the Americas staff for the terrific job that they've done? What a great group. What a great organization. Ladies and gentlemen, to moderate the next panel that we're looking forward to very much is Jackie Davalos, who is a technology reporter for Bloomberg News. I'm sure you've seen her on television, read her. She's a real star. Jackie, over to you.
My gosh, what an introduction. But now that everyone is well and caffeinated, let's get into this discussion about where Latin America sits in this new digital transformation. Of course, we'll touch on all things, including artificial intelligence and how the region can benefit from this new AI boom. And with me to discuss today is Michelle Gaida, the CEO of the Crack Institute for Tech Diplomacy. We'll also have Carlos Felipe Jaramillo from the World Bank, as well as Dominic Del Molino from Amazon Web Services to give us that private sector perspective, and Marushka Chocobar, who will provide a crucial perspective on how Peru, the government of Peru, plans to make the most out of this new digital transformation. So let's dive right in with kind of where Latin America sits today in the broader tech ecosystem in the world. It's taken a few years to get there, but there's a few bright spots that we've already been able to see in the past decade. There's more unicorns in the region than ever before. Marushka, I want to start with you. How have you seen the digital transformation in Peru really unfold?
Thanks, Jackie, for the question. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer for the opportunity to participate in this strategic event and share this panel with such outstanding professionals. I believe it's important to look at Latin America as a region that promised to be in most of the advanced region in digital transformation for the next years. According to the question, I would like to focus my first intervention by detailing some relevant data to understand the state of digital transformation in Latin America and in particular in Peru. In terms of connectivity, we have grown around 35 points in the last 10 years, growing with the 43 to 78 connectivity percent in the people, mainly driven by the pandemic. But we still have some challenge connecting rural areas and the jungle, mainly in Peru, for example, and Brazil. In smartphone penetration, we have grown by 40% in the last 5 years. In the case of Peru, 90% of people who connect to the internet do this connection through their cell phone. So this is the way that we could connect with the citizens. To the other side, Latin America has accelerated growth in financial inclusion, digital financial inclusion, going from 55% to 74% in banking, mainly with the use with digital services, digital payment, and digital wallet. In terms of e-commerce, Latin America has continued growing. Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, and Peru are very good examples for sustainable growth, between 15 to 30% considering their market size. In the case in Peru, we have maintained a growth ratio of 30% in the last 4 years, and it is expected to be 35% by 2026. Regarding digital payment, Peru has been leading the region since the beginning of the health crisis, and today it is estimated that 50% of the transactions between banks are made through digital wallets. So in terms of digital government, Peru has grown in the international indicators in the last 6 years. We are in the first place in the latest OECD digital government report. and second place in the Latin American in the latest World Bank GovTech Index. Finally, in the recent report about artificial intelligence of the Oxford University, Peru showed growth at 30 position thanks to the publication of National Artificial Intelligence Strategy and our National Artificial Intelligence Law.
I mean, that's great context, and you bring up some key sectors that we've seen thrive, including the fintech sector, and also the gig economy. Just today, if you guys were watching Bloomberg News, you would have seen that Uber shares dropped because of slower growth in Latin America, which just underscores how important the region is for some of the largest US-based tech players. Now, Dominic, maybe you can give us a little bit of an insight as to what conditions within the region have allowed, even encouraged, companies like AWS expand, because you guys actually in 2022 further expanded into regions, including Lima, Peru, Bogota, Colombia, and Santiago in Chile.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. And actually, before I begin, I really wanted to say I'm super impressed with the technological advances and innovation I'm seeing, even here at this conference. This is the most technical panel seating I've ever had. It's got the screens here. I ordered a Starbucks from my screen, so I've never seen anything like that. So it's really exciting to see that kind of technological innovation and advancement. As you mentioned, Jackie, we do see a lot of opportunity in Latin America for use of digital services. And it is exemplified by the fact that we believe it's important to provide those services within the region. And that's the reason back in February we announced that we're going to be investing in building a region in central Mexico. Our AWS region is a set of data centers that provides our cloud services directly in country, and it provides the country and the region the opportunity to place their data closer to the citizens and the companies that want access to it. It provides that lower latency set of services and a consistent set of services. So as you mentioned, international companies can say, how can I deliver these services, capabilities in our applications in the region that we want to, closer to the customers that we're going to be working with? Doing so in a region like central Mexico really enables that capability. And it's not just Mexico. As my colleague here mentioned, in places like Peru that have really leaned into taking advantage of digital capability, we're also making investments in infrastructure. And last year we announced the development of a local zone in Peru. A local zone is a smaller set of data centers that provides key compute and storage services, again locally, that the region can take advantage of. And it's not just these infrastructure investments, but also the training and skilling that we believe is necessary. We've made a commitment to train 29 million people by 2025. In Mexico, we've already trained almost 500,000 individuals in cloud skills and expect to train another 200,000 by 2025. And in Peru, we've partnered with the Peruvian Women in Cloud initiative to train 20,000 women to be technologists on the cloud. And we've partnered to get another 20,000 individuals with Nexa, I think, the zinc company, to bring up some cloud skills as well. So infrastructure investment, digital capability, and then that skilling of the population to really take advantage of it is a way we see this region really starting to accelerate its digital transformation.
We have a good foundation, is what I'm hearing from you and Marushka, that the region has really laid the groundwork for this new era, in particular artificial intelligence. You mentioned compute. It's going to take more than just the hardware. It's also going to take talent. And then you get geopolitics involved when we think about everything going on in the semiconductor industry. I want to bring in Felipe as well as Michelle on just how artificial intelligence is posing new challenges for a region that is finally has its footing, but what does it need to stay abreast of in this new era of AI? Michelle, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thank you for this. It's a pleasure to be here. Based on what Marushka and Dominic have said, let me build on that and the big opportunity that there is, whether it's AI or more broadly, every emerging tech sector. At the Kroc Institute for Tech Diplomacy at Purdue, we work with high-tech companies in Silicon Valley and all across the world. We work with partnered and allied governments all across the world so that those key stakeholders are working together to make sure that technology advances freedom. And one of the things that we see is a huge opportunity in those partnered and allied countries, and especially in Latin America, based on all of the trends that have been discussed today, a real and imminent opportunity for countries in Latin America and the region more broadly to take that next great leap. But one of the things that I want to make sure to share today is that seizing that opportunity and advancing the business case in Latin America, the key to that is not technology. The key to that is trusted technology. And when I talk about trust, I mean the principles that are going to enable partnership, whether it's diplomatic partnership, economic partnership, or technological partnership, and principles that form the basis of trust, like respect for human rights, respect for the rule of law, respect for intellectual property, transparency, integrity, all of these things that unite us as a region across the Americas and in particular Latin America. Those values in shaping the emergence of technology, AI regulations, AI legislation, or whether it's semiconductors, those trust principles is the basis for how Latin America innovates, is what's going to enable deep partnership and deep investment all across the region. And I'll draw a parallel. I was in Vietnam and Romania last fall, and both of those countries are in a very similar position to the region here, which is that there is a huge opportunity to leapfrog and to take that next great leap in their economic development and their prosperity and in their partnerships with the United States and other major economies. And the key and the message that I delivered to them also was the importance of trust in those relationships. Vietnam, for example, you mentioned semiconductors. Vietnam, for example, just signed last fall a comprehensive strategic partnership with the United States, which is a big deal 50 years after the end of the war. My family came from Vietnam. They fled the war. And so this is a big advancement in the US-Vietnam relationship. And so much of it is based on collaboration and partnership in semiconductors. And what Vietnam wants in order to live up to that and participate in that partnership is workforce and skilling talent, and it's investment from companies, US and otherwise, in Vietnam, and intellectual property, tech transfer. And there's huge opportunities for both the US and the Vietnam if that were to happen, but it requires trust. You share IP with partners that you trust. And so the message to them and all countries across the world is that it's a huge opportunity to seize the business, the technology, the diplomatic partnership, but you must make sure that trust principles are at the heart of that. And so I think that's exactly the opportunity that exists for Latin America, not in 2030, not in 25, but today in 2024. And you see that with some of the regulations that are coming up with AI, the rights-based and the risk-based values, and I would encourage that because that's what's going to be the most pivotal enabler of partnership here in the region.
Felipe, I want your perspective on something that Michelle just raised, the benefit, and in particular, the economic benefits that Latin America stands to gain from this new rise of artificial intelligence. What did we learn about the digital transformation from the past, and how can we make sure that fears about automation and AI taking people's jobs doesn't, in fact, become a reality?
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you for this invitation to speak in this distinguished panel. So let me react with two messages, one more positive, a half glass full, and one less positive, half empty glass. On the one hand, I am convinced that this digital connectivity, artificial intelligence poses a fantastic opportunity for Latin America. Why? Because Latin America, sadly, is the region of the world. I've worked in most regions in the world that grows the least, has been growing the least. We just did the update for 2023, now the forecast for 2024, for 2025, and it is the lowest growth of all developing regions, mainly because our productivity growth is low. We've done some calculations of how digital could really spark a higher productivity growth. Any increase of 10% in broadband in Latin America could bring an increase in productivity of our economies by 2.6%. So we think this could be a game changer if we really use this opportunity right. And I'm very enthused to see across so many countries, especially the bigger ones, Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, Colombia, this growing tech scene of fantastically talented young people who are really coming up with a lot of innovations, great ideas. We have some unicorns. We have several $1 billion worth of venture capital that has come in to finance them, and I think we need a lot more of that. So that's the half the half full, the positive side. But let me tell you my biggest concern. Sadly, we're still behind in connecting most people. Marushka just presented some figures from Peru, and I have to comment, Peru has been doing very well. They've come up as #2 in our GovTech index. Before COVID, much less than half of the people in Latin America were connected to broadband and to the internet. Thanks to the pandemic, ironically, a lot more people have been connected.
Yes.
So this is kind of the silver lining from the pandemic, even though it was very harsh on our economic lives. But from being connected, there's still 30% of the population, and in some countries a lot more, who are not connected, have no access, either because there's absolutely no connection at all available, or because they just don't have the equipment, or it's just too expensive. The Amazon and people who live in rural areas are still a huge problem. But then one thing is to be connected, and another one is to adopt and to use the technology. And that's where I'm very concerned, because a lot of people still don't know how to use this. They don't have the digital skills. And I'm particularly concerned about artificial intelligence, because I see the educated crowd in Latin America really jumping on this opportunity, but the vast majority of the population falling way behind. And we are already the most unequal region in the world, and I don't think we really can afford yet one more wave of people falling behind.
So you raise an important question of inequality, and we talk a lot about the benefits of artificial intelligence, but you raise this issue that it's not just about broadband access. I have a statistic here from a UNDP report that estimates that only 37% of Latin America has the necessary internet conditions at home to study and work and really take advantage of these AI tools. I want to bring in Marushka and Dominic here again to kind of talk about where is the responsibility going to lie. Companies like Amazon have a vested interest in making sure that their technology is being used, but also governments are trying to keep talent at home as well. How are you guys thinking about your responsibility, your roles really in ensuring this digital divide is finally closed? Marushka, why don't we start with you?
According to different sources, the artificial intelligence represents a market of $300 million for the next year. So we need to put our countries in this area of digital transformation in order to guarantee the economic development of our families, of our communities. Some data important about the Peruvian roles, and we should be a role in promoting the use of technologies in favor of the social and economic development of our country. At the same time, we must have a vigilant role, because with permanent contribution, participation, compliance, and monitoring of the guidelines that are being developed in different forums, such as United Nations, OECD, Hiroshima Process, UNESCO, and others that are promoting international guidelines for ethical use. Ethical is so important in the artificial intelligence area. Impulse green technology in order to prevent the climate change, and promoting codes of conduct international for companies and developers of artificial intelligence systems, because we need to take responsibility of the developers of algorithms in order to protect the privacy and the human rights of the people. We must participate in committees. We need to create our own committees with experts around artificial intelligence. Also, I consider that Peru's roles must be promotes the digital inclusion of people and population in situations of vulnerability, such as people with disability, people who are in extreme poverty, protect children in the internet risk, people who speak other language. For example, in Peru, we have 35 million people and 3 million of Quechua speakers. So we need to include all in this digital area. All of these themes is being complemented and contemplated in our reinforced foreign policy, led by Minister of Foreign Affairs and based on the pillars of our national digital transformation policy.
Dominic, how are you thinking about this from a competitive perspective? And I'm not just saying this because I'm a business reporter, but I am interested to hear how your strategy for kind of investing in Latin America is actually good for business when you think about the competition between some of the other cloud providers and those in the AI space as well.
Yeah, it's a good question, Jackie. And to be honest, we don't really look at what our competitors are doing as much as what our customers are able to achieve with our technology. And one of the things that we've seen around the world that's been particularly exciting with technologies like artificial intelligence is how artificial intelligence has been used really to help, interestingly, the least experienced individuals. What we found in our studies is that individuals who are new to technology, who may be still learning and are at the maybe more junior end of the spectrum, benefit the most from having an artificial intelligence assistant that might help them write code or draft letters or actually make themselves much more productive. And so for economies that are starting out with maybe less experienced individuals, we see the opportunity to take advantage of artificial intelligence technologies broadly adopted and broadly made available, which is why we want to make that infrastructure investment for availability of these services, really helps uplift some of the early career talent that's getting involved with cloud. So we feel that gives a real competitive advantage to the countries and the companies in region that are trying to figure out how to compete on the world stage. Another reason we like to take this investment is we have companies and countries that are interested in investing in their and incubating their early stage companies. And some of these companies are saying, we want to go global. We want the capability to begin here, but also deploy our technology to the broadest market possible. And so by investing and having to run their options and solutions on a global cloud provider like AWS, they can quickly go global with their services and reach bigger markets, which really gives that return on investment broadly, not just necessarily in region, but globally as well, which allows these countries to be a global player on the stage.
Before we're even able to get to the point where we can talk about the outcomes of how AI will impact Latin America, they have to build it first, and they have to be able to have this infrastructure in place. We touched on this a little bit already, but in the semiconductor industry, there really is a lot of tension between who has the best hardware, who's allowed to use it, a lot of export controls the US has imposed on China. Let's talk about what this means and how it might complicate Latin America's transformation, in particular, given the United States has a lot of investment in the region, US-based companies in the region. Michelle, what are your thoughts here? You spent a lot of time at the State Department probably thinking about geopolitical tensions. How do you think this factors into Latin America?
Yeah, so here's where I think there's another tremendous opportunity for Latin America. And for example, and especially on semiconductors, but for example, Costa Rica, as you know, recently unveiled their semiconductor investment roadmap because Costa Rica is very focused on becoming a part of the resilient, secure supply chain for semiconductors. There is a huge appetite in the US and among other allied and partner nations to nearshore and to friendshore semiconductor supply chains, and Costa Rica and other countries across Latin America can step in to fill that really important role in the supply chain. The Kroc Institute is based out of Purdue University. Purdue is the leading semiconductor university in the country, if not the world. And Purdue released a 3-point partnership plan with Costa Rica in order to help upskill Costa Rica on semiconductors. So the entire semiconductor degrees program is now available to the country. They're working together on R&D. So it's a really good example of partnership and the opportunity that exists for a country like Costa Rica or all across the region. And then one thing I'll add to that, and you used a phrase, Dominic, or I think maybe you used it, you both used it, but about what's good for business in the region. And the other thing that I want to emphasize, and this is what we hear from our high-tech companies across our network at the Kroc Institute, as well as other partners and allies in government, is don't underestimate how much of a premium that our companies are placing on data security, data privacy, and cybersecurity as they think about where to invest. And Dominic You're nodding your head. Yeah. So there's that, the premium on data and privacy in cybersecurity. And the second is how aggressive the Chinese Communist Party is being with regards to technology, not just as an economic lever, but as a lever to exploit, gain access to data and exploit that data. And so there is a tension there. When you think about trust, as I was talking about earlier, it is hard to invest into countries whose technological infrastructure is based on Chinese technology, because there is access to data and an opportunity to exploit that data that make it tough for a company, that make it tough for a country or an allied partner to put money or other diplomatic equity into a partnership. And so one of the things we're doing is helping to enable risk assessment in understanding what this means and how do you leverage technology to reap the benefits but not present unnecessary risk from untrusted providers like the CCP. We just launched our Tech Diplomacy Academy last week. Marushka and I were talking about it. We're going to get Peru on there. But the Tech Diplomacy Academy is helping to educate diplomatic, government, and corporate partners in the US and all across the world on these risks, so that we can work together to make sure that we are accelerating the innovation of trusted technology, we're accelerating the adoption of trusted technology, and making sure that we're partnering in the best ways to advance our national interests, to advance human rights, and all of the values that make up Latin America, the United States, and many of our other partners across the world. We're pleased to partner and want to commit to partnering with all countries in Latin America to help facilitate that.
Carlos Felipe, before we move on from this particular theme, I want to understand your view and kind of the economic picture and how that might be impacted by this complex relationship that exists between the US, China, and Latin America. And as it starts to really intensify, how do you think that shifts the potential economic benefits Latin America can reap from artificial intelligence?
That's a difficult question. Let me be honest, I don't know. I think there's too many uncertainties in this picture at this point. But what I would say that worries me in this whole debate is that our region, Latin America and the Caribbean, has had a tradition of trying to integrate itself into global trends and the global economy for decades, failing to do so in good terms, and as a result, growing very slowly and giving very few opportunities to its population to really emerge. We haven't had the kinds of economic miracles that we saw in countries like Korea, in Singapore, in Taiwan, a bunch of East Asian countries that have been able to move ahead. And so my biggest concern here is that we go back to some sort of finding external causes for our problems and saying that, oh, in the past it was the tensions between the US and the Soviet Union. Now it's going to be the tensions between China and the US, et cetera. I feel like Latin America found many excuses to its problems in what was happening outside. So in the meantime, I was telling a few of you earlier, in the meantime, for example, I'll give you just a practical example. In Africa, a number of countries led by Kenya back in 2007 adopted digital transactions, digital money through cell phones. I visited, I actually lived there for a few years, and I just couldn't believe how everybody, even the poorest, bought everything with digital currency. 2007. Finally, in 2020-21, Brazil has led the pack and started its PIX. So 13, 14 years later than African countries, we finally moved. I don't know what we were waiting for. I think part of it was we were very heavy on regulations, even with new technologies. Finally, there is a model. I hope all the other countries are looking at Brazil and moving in that direction. I think we have a fintech world that is growing and it's bubbling, and I think that's great. Just giving access to SMEs, to people who've never had access to credit, I think that's fantastic. My hope for the future is that we have a breakthrough, that we Latin Americans look into, find a way to use digital and artificial intelligence for education. Because sadly, when we look at the reading and writing skills of kids in 3rd and 4th grade, we are last in the world still. And these are things that we should be doing, not waiting for the US or China or anybody to be doing. I'm hoping that through digital technologies, we can find a way to do what we haven't been able to do for decades, address that kind of sort of deep inequality.
So if the conditions to have a thriving technology sector, if they're going to be fairly dependent on the regulatory regime, what sort of regulatory regime needs to exist? Because this is something, as specifically to artificial intelligence, is still hotly debated even here in the United States. You have some frameworks in Europe which companies say are far too restrictive. And even in the US, you have Republican as well as Democratic lawmakers basically saying that national security concerns are really at the top of the list. And so they want to stay ahead, which might mean that they might be a little bit more permissive when it comes to regulation. Biden has already put out his executive order last year. I'm just curious, how do you think Latin America should approach kind of the regulatory question? Why don't you start off, Carlos Felipe, and then I would love your perspective on it as well, Marushka.
Okay, as Michelle, Carlos, and Dominic mentioned before, in the terms of regulation of the participation of the entities of government, we need to focus in connectivity, in digital economic, in government, digital government, in talent. At the end, we need to invest in our talent in our countries, and in trust, no in security, digital security, or trust in the digital environment, and in innovation. So if we see the perspective of the talent, in Peru, we recently launched the National Digital Talent Strategy. So we need to try to attract and retain our talent, because the people who knows around all materials of the digital transformation is a very huge difficult to prepare and retain in our countries. So we could promote training and STEM programs in order to promote the participation of women in technology and developing technological skills such as programming, data analysis, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and others. We must to offer attractive career plans and growth opportunity both in the public sector and in the private sector. The other one is promote work flexibility or remote work, because from anywhere in the country or expand outside the country. Permanent collaboration between public and private sector, promote educational opportunities such as scholarships or credit for students that low-income young people. We also think that the digital transformation is transversal to all of careers. So with this vision, all of our education steps need to include some component of digital knowledge. At the end, within the intervention of our government is focused on the include all the population in this benefit of artificial intelligence and digital transformation process.
Carlos, what's your thoughts on kind of the balance between regulating emerging technology and potentially stifling innovation? Where do you think Latin America should really kind of go when it comes to this very delicate balance that many countries haven't figured out?
Again, let me plead ignorance. I think my overall sense, my opinion, is that this technology is moving at a speed that governments can barely keep up, cannot really keep up. So I'm a little bit skeptical that some very heavy-handed sort of prevention of these technologies is the right approach. So I would try to, I think with the technical people we have at the World Bank, we're studying all the regulatory structures of the US, Europe, all the other countries, and trying to see what seems to be working best and trying to adopt the best practices and recommend some of those. But I think this is the challenge of the day.
Michelle, you brought up trust in the beginning of this conversation, and everyone on this panel agrees that Latin America has not been at the forefront of the digital transformation broadly that the world has seen over the last couple decades. So it's kind of starting from a different starting point than the US or even the European Union is at. And so those regulatory frameworks might be right for those particular regions, but where do you think Latin America needs to go when it comes to this regulation question? Do we run the risk of kind of over-regulating, or do you think the attention, given just how powerful this technology can be, should be placed on perhaps bolstering those safeguards first?
Yeah, I'd say two things. So when you think about the practice of tech diplomacy, it is a new category and a new way of working. And one of the things that we've seen from our work across the world is that winning in technology requires engineering, but not in the sense of microelectronics or artificial intelligence and large language models. Engineering in the sense that we have to design new processes for how we work together between government, between the private sector, between high tech to solve big problems. And that requires, and especially with AI, that government and that private sector are talking to each other and working hand in hand in new and different ways. And that's exactly what needs to happen with artificial intelligence, because there is a risk in putting too much emphasis on government regulating how this technology gets used, because if the innovators and the people designing and innovating on artificial intelligence don't know where the technology is going, government is not going to know where the technology is going. And so there has to be a live conversation. And that's what tech diplomacy is all about. It's how do corporate and government partners and allies work together to shape the trajectory of these technologies. And it's based off proven models. This is what we did with the Clean Network at the State Department. And Ambassador Todd Chapman is here. He was part of this effort. But we worked with 60 countries, 200 telecommunications companies representing 2/3 of global GDP to come together and say that we're going to put trust at the center of how we're going to adopt 5G technology. And that mitigated significantly Huawei's ability to be an untrusted vendor to many of our partners and allies across the world. So there's a proven model for how this works and how we execute tech diplomacy, and I'd say that exact model is needed now across all areas of technology, whether it be AI or quantum or cloud and other really critical technologies that are going to be important to our collective national securities and economic prosperity. And then I'd say the other really unique advantage in Latin America is there's a proliferation really of national level legislation and potential regulatory frameworks that are taking place across the region. That's a great lab to start to see and test and experiment with what frameworks are going to work. And you mentioned the United States has a framework, the EU as a region is developing one, and there may be great things to pull from both of those. But at the same time, I think there's a great opportunity to take a diverse look at what's going to work best for the region, what's going to work best for each of the individual countries in the region. And so there's a dynamism among what the regulatory framework, there's innovation happening in regulation as well, in addition to the technology. And I think Latin America has a good opportunity to find what works best. But ultimately, the end goal is to make sure that that technology advances freedom and security and prosperity here.
One of the concerns here in the United States is the concentration of power and having too few companies taking a lot of the air in the room when it comes to growth, specifically in artificial intelligence. How do you think Latin America is approaching it? Where do you think the majority of the growth and this kind of new leap into AI is going to come from? The startup sector or the big tech giants that we see here in the US?
You know, it's hard to predict. I'd say it's probably both. And there's, again, a really dynamic business and technology environments taking place across the region. But you've seen an explosion in fintech, as you had talked about. Mercado Libre, Nubank, all of these emerging, these unicorns. There's a great talent pipeline all across the region. And so I'd say there's a huge opportunity for both in partnering with large and developed tech companies, in addition to now adding and becoming emerging tech leaders. But I'd say, again, the premium is on trust as a currency and on making sure that those technologies advance security, data privacy, so that they're recruiting partners and recruiting investment into the region to fuel growth.
I think that's all we have time for today, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Jackie, and thanks, panel. We are going to go immediately now to an interview with the opposition presidential candidate of Venezuela. So please direct your views to the two screens here on the side of the stage. This will run for about 10 minutes, and then we will have the next panel to follow. Please look at the screen.
Well, I'm delighted in my capacity as chairman of the Council of the Americas to welcome Venezuela's unity presidential candidate, Edmundo González, and opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado. We're here for a keynote interview at the 54th Washington Conference on the Americas. Thank you both for joining us from the campaign trail at an incredible busy time as you prepare for elections that have been scheduled for July 28th. Edmundo and Maria Corina, I understand you have brief comments you would like to make, and then I'd like to ask a few questions. We're very interested in your thoughts and impressions from the campaign.
Well, thank you. We're super grateful to the Council of Americas and American Society for this